Hey everyone, we're back with another installment of the Family Astrologer, a space where we can have conversations about all things related to family dynamics through the lens of astrology. Now, today I'm going to be offering you another personal share. I'm going to be sharing the story of my daughter Leela's birth through the lens of astrology. Her solar return, her birthday is next week. So by the time this episode airs, it's going to be right around that time. So I thought it'd be the perfect time to finally tell her story as well. So just to give you a little bit of a recap and a heads up, since it is Mercury retrograde at this time that I'm recording, I am feeling very ready to bring on some other astrologers and experts to share in this conversation. But I didn't want to start that during Mercury retrograde. So I have a couple more personal shares to circle back to, just so you all get familiar with me, my background, and my connection with this work. So yeah, let's get into Leela's story. So we're going back to the summer of 2019. I know, the before times, the before the pandemic, and in my world, the before children chapter of my life. So I had just gotten finished finalizing my submission to become a level 4 NCGR astrologer. And I had also just taken this 6-hour ISAR exam. And so I was feeling like it was just like a very buzzy week. And Uranus was stationing retrograde at that time. So yeah, that was the week I got pregnant. I got pregnant the week that Uranus stationed retrograde, which is pretty cool because my son was born, different pregnancy. My son was born on a Uranus station. So apparently my pregnancies have had a little bit of a Uranian flavor to them. And also with Leelas, there were a lot of unexpected and very exciting elements going on in my life. So at that time in 2019, I was publishing a book. I was getting ready to publish a book. And so the pregnancy, while I felt really ready for it biologically, I also was like, well, this is also like a peak moment in my career. So shoot, I guess this baby's just going to come along for this ride with me. I was planning a book release party in New York City where I used to live at that time, and just found out I was pregnant. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be drinking at that party. But it was still great. I ended up cooking for 40 people, or maybe it was more than that. It was at least 40 people at the book release party. It was just like an intimate gathering of astrologers and lots of people who I'd studied with and friends and other astrologers in the city. And that was really fun, but it was kind of crazy. I was pregnant and carting all this food into Manhattan, and it was a wild time. I had a couple release parties here in Cleveland. And yeah, my book was Your Astrological Cookbook, the perfect recipe for every sign. So that's why I was doing all the cooking, if you weren't familiar. And so yeah, at the time I was writing horoscopes for Bon Appetit magazine, and that's how Simon & Schuster reached out to me to write that book and curate all those different menus for each different sign. So that was a really fun time, very exciting time. I was also recording a podcast called The Fallen Fruit with a couple of my really good friends. We were doing a lot of ancestral work at this time. It was really cool. So to be becoming a parent while I was doing a lot of ancestral work on my own was really really profound. And I have some stories to share related to that. But at the time, Saturn was transiting the sign of Capricorn. And that was a time because Saturn has its domicile, its nocturnal domicile in Capricorn, that a lot of people were doing the ancestral healing and revisiting, and both on a personal and a collective level. Like that was a time where the conversation reached a fever pitch around just like healing, and recognizing like around our history, and even like the concept of like racism was entering into that conversation. And so you had like a lot of people looking back into their ancestral histories and making peace or healing like from that sort of way. So it was a really interesting time in the collective, and people are still doing a lot of that healing work today. And it was cool to be doing that work with friends and all of us coming from different cultural backgrounds, and it was really profound. And so that was definitely going on at the time. So fast forward to March of 2020. Everything was shutting down, and that was the day of my baby shower. So on the day of my baby shower, everything just started shutting down. Schools started shutting down, businesses, and people started pulling out. And so we were like, should we cancel the shower? Should we do it? We had already had all the food. We had already had all like the cake ordered. Like we had the cake. Everything was ready to go. We'd like paid for this venue. So we were like, all right, I guess we're going to do it, but with half the people. And we felt so weird about it. It was just so weird. It wasn't like, it wasn't the baby shower I had envisioned, but we made the most of it. And, you know, in hindsight, I'm glad that we did that because that was the last time that I saw my mom, or a lot of my close family. And I was 7.5 months pregnant. So really weird time to not have support from your family, really weird time to be alone, really weird time to not have like your friends nearby. So that was the downside of it. There is also plenty of upsides because I was working as a hairstylist still. I was still doing astrology and everything, but I was also working as a hairstylist pretty much full time. And so to be on your feet, if you haven't done it, then it's hard to think about. But it's not just being on your feet for long stretches of time. It's being on your feet with your arms up, trying to look stylish, trying to carry on a conversation when you're out of breath. Like my daughter, I carried her so high up, my diaphragm was just smushed. And yeah, and then just being further and further and further away from your client because your belly gets bigger and shampooing people gets hard, cutting hair gets hard. It's just hard. So I was really grateful to collect unemployment and be off my feet because otherwise, as a hairstylist, you really don't get like paid maternity leave or you don't get any of that. So I was like, okay, cool. Like I'll definitely take that. Like that's an upside. So I got to chill. I got to relax. One of the other big buzzwords going on with Saturn in Capricorn and the eclipses going on in Capricorn and Cancer was like rest culture and burnout culture. And so there was just like this big dissection starting to happen about over busying ourselves. And so I was definitely feeling burnt out, not just from trying to get my astrology career off the ground, but launching the book and doing hair and being pregnant and doing the podcast and doing all this other stuff. And I just was kind of grateful at 7.5 months pregnant to do nothing for a little while. It was like the first time that I could really do nothing in a long, long, long time. I'm a very cardinal chart. I like to do stuff. And it took being 7.5 months pregnant in a pandemic to sit on my ass, and it felt really good. It was so restorative. So it was great, you know, in that regard, but it was also scary. So during that pregnancy, I was listening to a lot of podcasts that talked about wild birth and free birth and and home birth and all of that. And I was really into that idea. And you know, in my previous lifetime, I was immersed in communities that were very naturopathic and yogic. And, you know, that's kind of when I started getting into astrology, was hanging out with a lot of people who were really like spiritual and back to the earth, progressive in a way. And so anyways, like there was a lot of pressure from like community, like, yeah, do a home birth, like, yeah, take your power back, girl, and all that stuff. And I just, you know, I decided that while I really admire and applaud people who have that kind of courage to do a home birth, I decided that because my mom had had 3 C-sections, that I would take a middle path. I would work with midwives and we would birth in a hospital. And I would have the best of both worlds, in my opinion. I would have like the experience of working with a midwife without all kinds of medical intervention unless it was necessary. But we'd be in a hospital in case anything went wrong. And it did. So I was really glad about that. But as we got closer to the pandemic, as we got closer to the due date, I started to feel, number one, I started to get really anxious. I started to get really scared. Like, there's this virus that I don't know anything about, that I feel like a lot of people don't know anything about. There's just a lot of unknowns. And I was really scared to go to a hospital where sick people were going. I was really scared about that. So I had people like on social media saying, well, you should try to do a home birth. And I was like 8 months pregnant. I was like, one, I don't really intuitively feel good about that for me in this pregnancy that I'm having. Like, other people, go ahead, like do what's best for you. But for me, I didn't feel really great about that. I also didn't feel great about changing my whole birth plan at the last minute, especially when we couldn't go anywhere. So yeah, I just felt like really like confused about what to do. And so I did the only thing I could do, which was just trust the process. That's all I could do, was just trust the process and hope for the best. But when you're at home and you're not going anywhere, time starts going a lot slower. And I know we all felt it in our own ways at that time in the spring of 2020, but I was miserable. Like, the last 2 weeks of pregnancy for me were really, really horrible. So my due date, I had 2 due dates. One was at the end of April, and then the other one was May 1st. And so I was fingers crossed and hoping for an Aries. I was kind of thinking, I'm going to have an Aries baby because, I don't know, my grandma's an Aries. We got some Aries moons and risings on my husband's side, and none on my family except my grandma. But I was kind of hoping for Aries. My husband has some Aries placements in his chart, as do I. So I was like, yeah, Aries, let's get this baby out sooner. Yeah. And wouldn't you know it, Taurus season arrives, and I'm like, okay, it's going to be a Taurus, but maybe she still wants to come early. Who knows? And I just started to get miserable. I started to get like depressed, just from being so huge and uncomfortable and just having nothing left to do to distract myself. I was just bored and uncomfortable and just wanting it all to come to an end. It was so bad. And of course, my due date came and went, and my dad decides to come over and brew beer with my husband the day after my due date. And I remember just being so mad that they would plan something like that. I remember being happy to see my dad because I was so lonely. And it was nice to have like someone familial close by, but I didn't feel, I was in total nesting mode, and I just was so mad that they were in the driveway brewing beer because I felt like, oh, you guys don't believe that my body can give birth on time. And in hindsight, it's so silly, but at the time I was just like so mad. And I remember just crying on my front porch, just begging for this baby to come out. We were doing everything. I was going on multiple walks a day, trying to get this Taurus baby to budge. So I finally had like my 39-week checkup, and they were like, this baby is not going to come out. And I was like, why? And they said, because she hasn't dropped, she's not aligned with your cervix. So my Taurus baby, Tauruses have the reputation for being stubborn. And sure enough, this baby wasn't going anywhere. She was not going to come out. She was quite comfortable where she was. And you can't rush a Taurus. You cannot force them to do anything that they're not ready to do. It has to be on their time. So no matter what I did, all going for different walks, walking on asymmetrical curves, I even decided I would go see a chiropractor, which felt like a big risk at that time during the pandemic. So I worked with like a prenatal chiropractor to help the baby align and to help her to come out, but it didn't work. She never aligned. So my midwives told me, they said, stay positive because you never know what's going to happen in birth. Everyone's bodies are different. You never know what's going to happen. And, your body could just push that baby into place and things could still happen the way that you want. I wanted to have a totally unmedicated birth. I wanted to experience birth. I wanted to experience the pain. I wanted to feel it all. I wanted to really experience that. Don't ask me why, but I did. And so then as we're getting down to it, I started to really agonize over what moon placement is this baby going to have? Because right around that first week of May, there was the moon was going to be in Virgo, the moon was going to be in Libra, then the moon was going to be in Scorpio. And some of you might know by now that I have a Scorpio moon and my father has a Scorpio moon. So since we're talking about family astrology and signs and signatures running in the family, I was terrified that I was going to pass on this difficult Scorpio moon to my daughter. I was really terrified about that. I was worried how that might reflect on me as a parent. I was worried what that would mean, not just for me, but for her and for our family story. I was really worried about it. And so that was the other thing that I was really freaking out about, was that I wanted her to come out ASAP so that I could be relieved of being pregnant. I also wanted her to have her chart. I wanted her to have her moment and to choose it all on her own. But I also did not want her to be a Scorpio moon. I was really scared about that. So on the morning of May 4th, I woke up 5 a.m. having what I thought were contractions. And I was so happy I could cry. I was so happy I could cry. The moon was in Libra. And I was just fuck yes. This is the day. May the 4th be with you. I was so happy. I was so happy. And I came downstairs and I told my husband, yep, it's going to be the day. And then my water broke and we were on the phone with the midwives and they're like, yeah, stay home where you can be comfortable as long as you can. But then 2:00 rolled around and they're like, yeah, your water's been broken for, 7 hours now. So maybe you should come in. And I was so excited. And they checked my cervix and they said, oh, nope, you're only 3 centimeters along. And then I was just oh no. So very quickly, they kind of told me you're not progressing. And since your waters have broke, we kind of have a ticking clock. We can't let your waters be ruptured for more than 24 hours or you could be at risk for an infection. So I was on this birthing unit floor where there was an opportunity to have a water birth or to labor in the water. And I got in there and I was hoping I would really like it. And I hated it. And I had an IV in my arm because they had to give me oxytocin to help kind of speed the labor along. And so I couldn't really get into the positions I wanted to get into with this IV in my arm. And so I was just, not real thrilled about the whole thing. But I was kind of a champ when it came to the labor pain and the contractions. So I labored naturally to 9.5 centimeters where I stalled. So I stalled at 9.5 centimeters and my midwives did everything to try to get my cervix to go a little bit more open. And eventually I had to get the epidural because I was just getting tired. They were like, do you want to get back in the tub? And I was like, no. I was like, I don't want to feel one more of these contractions. So this was around midnight that night. So I got the epidural and they said, maybe we give you the epidural and you can relax and your cervix will open to 10 and we can start pushing. And so I was like, all right, I'm on board with that. And so around 7 a.m. the next morning on May 5th, I get to 10 centimeters and I wake up. I had gotten to take a nap with the epidural and I woke up And they're like, all right, Catherine, like, we're ready. Are you ready to meet your baby girl? And I was like, yes. And so we start pushing, and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like, I think we're going to be here for a while, because it was sunrise and the sun was in Taurus. So if the sun is in Taurus and the sun is rising, that means that the rising sign is also Taurus. So I knew that there aren't any Taurus risings in my family except my mother-in-law. So I was like, maybe we could have a baby with a Taurus rising, maybe. But then I was like, there's no Gemini risings in my family, none at all. So, but then Cancer rising, the next sign would be my rising sign, my mother's rising sign, and my grandmother's rising sign. And so I just kind of figured, oh, there's probably a pretty strong chance this baby's going to be born with a Cancer rising. So I'm in my mind, I'm like, well, that means I'm going to push for 3 hours. And I did. So I pushed for 3 hours, and her head was there, but her head was never aligned properly. And so they brought in a surgeon, and my midwives weren't going to like force me to make that decision, but they were like, well, here's the facts. And as they were explaining to me why I might want to just get the C-section, I heard an irregularity on the heart monitor. And that was my daughter's signal to me that now's my time to be born. So I said to them, okay, like, it took me a minute. Like, unlike with my son, I was like, yeah, cut him out. I'm done. With this one, I was just like, yeah, I guess I have to. And so I was momentarily kind of disappointed that I didn't get kind of like the birth that I wanted. But it was so worth it, having I was really happy with the energy in the surgical room, and I was just really happy. And there were some funny things that happened in there. One of the surgeons, first of all, asked me if I wanted to watch them cut me open. And I was like, hell no. I do not want to watch you guys slice me open right now. Like, no, thanks. But when they did cut me open, they said, nice abs. And I said, thanks. So there were some funny moments in there, and like morale was good. And so yeah, it was cool. My daughter was born at exactly 11 a.m. on the dot. So when they called the time, they said 11 a.m. And I said, are you sure? I said, are you sure it's not 10:59? Are you sure it's not 11:01? And my husband's like, yeah, she's an astrologer. Like, you can't lie to her. And they're like, nope, it's 11 on the dot. And I thought that was funny, because as like a Libra moon baby, she had like a very even birth time and also date. So she was born 11 a.m. on the dot. She was also born 5/5/2020. So there's just like this very Libran flow to her birth data even. And so, yeah, she was born with like a little elongated skull from just not being able to come out. So in that instance, I was very grateful for Western medicine, because I probably wouldn't have made it if I had been birthing at a different time period, or if I had been at home even. It would have been much harder to get that kind of care. So anyways, let's pull up Leela's chart, because it's kind of intense. It's kind of a doozy. Okay, so here's Miss Leela's birth chart. And I've shown this chart to some of my students and colleagues, and the reaction is always, woof. She's got a little bit of an intense chart. And we see that with Pluto right there on the descendant. And we see that also with Chiron right there on the midheaven. And we see the moon is in a square to Pluto. So when I pulled up my daughter's chart, I was very enamored with it. I said, this girl is going to be kind of a badass. This girl is going to do the Plutonian thing where you sort of lean into some of the more difficult or obscure or mysterious questions in life. And Pluto sort of just Pluto energy just sort of doesn't shy away from the shadow. It kind of leans in. There's a curiosity. There's an ability to tolerate and withstand with Pluto. And sometimes it's based on conditioning, and sometimes it's just like kind of how we're born. And maybe it's a little bit of both. Because now that Leela is 3 years old, I can look at her chart with so much more love than fear. Of course, it was all love when I first looked at it, but I was also scared. I was scared that this Moon Pluto business would mean that I would be a very complicated parent, and I was worried that I was gonna, mess her up. And since then, I've realized that no matter what I do, I'm probably gonna mess up my child. All we can do is love them. All we can do is the best that we can. But I was very relieved that she did not have a Scorpio moon. So while her moon does have the intensity flavor of Pluto, a Libra moon is still much easier to work with, I feel, than a Scorpio moon. Scorpio moon has its redeeming qualities for sure. I mean, I at this point in my life, I'm not sure I would trade it. I kind of like the gifts that it offers in terms of determination and stamina, and also a fascination with the hidden. So Leela certainly does inherit that, but I felt empowered that a lot of the ancestral healing and work that I'd done with my family line had created a shift. So even though it's a similar signature, the shift happened. She did not get the Scorpio moon that I inherited from my father. So that was really cool for me, but I still had to reconcile this Moon Pluto square and what that would mean. And all I can say is that she's only 3 years old. She is nowhere near, done living out her chart. And there's so many different ways that could come into being. But one way that it does show up, and this is true because she's a Taurus, is that she's very possessive. She likes things done a certain way. She's very attached to things being done her way. I mean, this is also a toddler thing, but she's very attached. Like if she's having a good time with me and her dad comes home, she's upset about it, even though she loves her dad. And vice versa. I'm up here recording this video. When I go downstairs, she might tell me she doesn't want me there because she's having a good time with her dad. So yeah, there's just like a fixity, with being a Taurus, also being in the middle of a fixed sign. It's like peak fixed, but also this Moon Pluto, it's just very deep feelings. And, she's already starting to ask from as early as she could talk. She wanted to know about death. She started asking me about her deceased grandfather. She started asking me about my deceased cat that passed when I was pregnant with her. There was just a lot of things. And Halloween is her favorite holiday. She's very obsessed with it. And from an early age, she got into shows with Halloween themed characters in them. So she's definitely a Plutonian girl. And that makes me proud. That makes me proud that she has inherited some sort of depth. So my job as her parent is to guide that and to support that and to be cautious of that as well, of what that can produce. As far as Chiron on the midheaven goes, that also produced similar feelings of, am I going to screw up my kid? Because, Chiron does have associations with woundedness, but that's not all it has associations with. Chiron also has associations with the healing profession. My daughter's very empathetic. She shows an interest in caring for animals, and yeah, she should, like a lot of kids do, shows an interest in being a doctor. You know what I mean? So, but that's entertaining to me because with Chiron on the midheaven, I'm like, yeah, you could do that, girl, or you could be a therapist or something. So I share the difficulties in her chart to both share my process of coming around and being curious about it rather than fearful. And because at the end of the day, you do the best that you can as a parent, and you're going to have blind spots and you're going to have places where you don't meet the mark. by your standards or someone else's standards. Like we're not superheroes. I mean, we are, but we're not. So yeah, I would just encourage parents to be very curious about how these placements can show up. And it's kind of cool watching her come into her chart because she is really smart. And I think all 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds are really smart, like smarter than we give them credit for. But this girl seems to be very smart. And I attribute that to her grand air trine. So yeah, it's cool watching your little ones grow into and embody their charts. And whether you have parents or not, the longer you study astrology, the longer you get to see how you embody your chart, and you kind of can gain like that appreciation for your younger past self, the way that a parent would for their child, in some ways of like, aw, look how you're living with that, and look how you're working with that, and look how that placement or that tendency has evolved and shifted in the way that it actualizes itself. So it's kind of cool. So thank you for journeying with me back in time to the birth story of my daughter through the astrological lens. And I hope it was entertaining for you if you're into birth stories and that sort of thing. I know I am. And so, yeah, I look forward to sharing more of these stories, not necessarily from me. Not from me. But I look forward to sharing more of these stories with you all in the future. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.